Hey everyone, welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, certified financial planner and owner of Elevation Financial. Thanks for joining me today. Today's episode may not apply to you, but it may apply to you depending on your situation. So the topic today is, so you're late filing your taxes, now what? April 15th has come and gone. Your tax return has not been filed maybe. If it has been filed, you can ignore this. But if it hasn't been filed, or you're curious about what happens if you don't file, that's what this episode is all about. If that's you, you're not alone. Millions of Americans miss the tax filing deadline every year. And while it's not ideal, it's also not the end of the world. So what matters now is what you do next. First off, the worst thing you can do is nothing. The IRS doesn't just go away, and ignoring the situation only makes it more expensive. But if you take the right steps quickly, you can minimize the damage and get back on track. So here's what you need to know. First, check to see if you filed an extension. Maybe you forgot. It happens. So ask yourself, did you file an extension before the deadline? And if you did, you have until October 15th to file your return. You may not owe any penalties as long as you paid enough of what you owed by April 15th. An extension gives you more time to file, but it does not give you more time to pay. So keep that in mind. If you didn't file an extension and you haven't filed your return by April 15th, you're officially late. The clock is ticking, and potentially so are the penalties. So let's understand the costs of late filing. A lot of people assume that being late on their taxes is some kind of catastrophic event, but it's not. It's, the longer you wait, though, the more it's going to cost you. So here's what the IRS can charge you when you miss the deadline. First, failure to file penalty. This is the bigger of the two penalties and the one that adds up the fastest. The IRS charges 5% of your unpaid taxes for each month or part of a month that your return is late, up to a maximum of 25%. And if you're more than 60 days late, there's also a minimum penalty, which will vary by year, or 100% of your unpaid tax, whichever is smaller. The key phrase here is unpaid taxes. If you've already had enough withheld from your paycheck or made sufficient estimated tax payments, you might owe very little or even nothing in penalties, even if you're late filing. All right, the next penalty, the failure to pay penalty. If you owe taxes and you haven't paid them, the IRS also charges a failure to pay penalty of 0.5% per month or 0.5% every month on the outstanding balance up to 25%. This penalty is smaller, quite a bit smaller, than the failure to file penalty, but it also accrues until the balance is paid in full. It's also interest. The IRS can charge interest on your unpaid balance. It's tied to the federal funds rate, and that's going to keep growing as well. The silver lining here is if you're owed a refund, you won't face any penalties for filing late. The IRS doesn't penalize you for letting them hold on to your money for longer. But that said, you do have a 3-year window to claim your refund before the government takes it, so you don't want to hold out too long. So bottom line, file your return as soon as possible. This sounds obvious, but the most important thing you can do right now is file the return, even if you can't pay the full amount you owe. A lot of people make the mistake of not filing because they know they can't pay, and so they just ignore it. And that's not the right move. That's the wrong move to go for. So filing without paying results in the failure to file penalty, again, which is higher. Not filing at all does trigger that penalty, but the failure to pay penalty is lower. So again, filing is a good move to make sure that you potentially avoid that failure to file penalty. So file first, figure out payment next. All right, so what if you can't pay what you owe? This is where a lot of people get stuck. You know you owe money, you don't have it, and so you just don't file. And again, that strategy only makes things worse. It's very tempting just to kind of put your head in the sand and ignore it, but that makes things worse. So the IRS actually has several options available for people who can't pay their full balance right away. First, the most common and the most accessible option is to set up a payment plan. The IRS offers installment agreements that allow you to pay your balance over time. If you owe $50,000 or less in combined tax, penalties, and interest, you can often set up a payment plan directly online through the IRS website. The monthly payments are based on your total balance and how quickly you can pay it off. There's a setup fee, and interest and penalties will still accrue on the unpaid balance, but it keeps you in good standing and stops the situation from escalating further. It puts a plan in place. And honestly, this is the most common way to handle overdue tax bills. Next, you could request currently not collectible status. So if you're in genuine financial hardship and you can't afford to pay anything right now, you might be able to request that your account be placed on currently not collectible status. It doesn't erase what you owe, but it temporarily halts any collection activity while your financial situation is documented and reviewed. Another option is an offer in compromise. This allows you to settle your tax debt for less than the full amount if paying in full would cause significant financial hardship. The IRS evaluates your ability to pay, your income, your expenses, asset equity before deciding whether to accept an offer. The process takes time, and it isn't guaranteed, but it's a legitimate option for certain taxpayers. Keep in mind, though, this path does not have a very high success rate. An offer in compromise is very difficult to get approved, and less than half of applications generally get accepted. In fact, the acceptance rate, depending on the year, fluctuates between 21% and 42%. So it's not a very high acceptance rate. So a lot of people think, oh, an offer in compromise sounds great, but it's actually not necessarily a super viable option for everybody. And ultimately, be sure you talk to a tax professional. If you owe a significant amount of money in taxes and you aren't sure how to go forward, hiring a tax pro can be worth every penny. So a qualified tax professional can help you understand your options, negotiate with the IRS on your behalf, and potentially reduce what you owe in penalties. So can you get penalties waived? Sometimes. The IRS has a process called first-time penalty abatement that allows qualified taxpayers to have certain penalties removed. If you have a clean compliance history, meaning you haven't been assessed penalties in the past 3 tax years, you might be eligible to have your failure to file or failure to pay penalty removed by asking. You can request first-time abatement by calling the IRS directly or submitting a written request. It's not really that complicated, but a lot of people don't know it exists. There's also something called reasonable cause abatement. If your late filing was due to circumstances beyond your control, such as serious illness, natural disaster, death in the family, you might be able to have penalties waived by documenting those circumstances and submitting a written explanation to the IRS. Neither option is guaranteed, but it's worth pursuing, potentially if you qualify. Also, don't forget your state taxes. Everything we talked about applies to federal, but most states have their own filing deadlines and their own penalty structure. So some states automatically grant extensions when you file a federal extension. Others require you to file a separate extension request. And some states can be more aggressive than the IRS when it comes to collections. If you're late on your federal return, there's a good chance you're also late on your state return. So check your state's Department of Revenue website to understand what the rules are and what your obligations are to get caught up. So ultimately, you want to get organized so this doesn't happen again. So once you've kind of handled this immediate situation, take a step back and ask, why were you late in the first place? For some people, it's simply a matter of procrastination. For others, it's because they're missing documents or their finances are more complicated than they used to be, or they don't have the right support in place. So a few things can help you going forward. One is work with a tax pro. If your tax situation is even moderately complex, meaning you own a business, you've got investments, you receive income from multiple sources, having a professional to help you out can make a big difference. They can ensure that your return is filed on time, also that you're not leaving money on the table. And honestly, a tax pro can be a good project manager. If you're doing it on your own, you might just not get around to it. But a tax pro can kind of nag you and say, hey, I'm looking for these documents. They can prompt you along the way, make sure you're paying attention to deadlines. That can be useful. Also, set up a tax folder at the start of every year, whether it's physical or digital. Having one dedicated place for W-2s, 1099s, and other tax documents means you're not scrambling to find everything in March and April. Also, consider quarterly estimated tax payments. If you're self-employed or have significant income that isn't subject to withholding, staying on top of estimated payments throughout the year reduces your April bill and keeps you from being caught off guard. Also, just mark the deadline in your calendar. It should show up on most calendars by default, but make sure it doesn't sneak up on you. Plan for it. Make sure it's obvious to you when that deadline is. And ultimately, take action. If you're late, filing your taxes is not a disaster, but it doesn't, it's not the end of the world or anything, but it does cost you money. And the longer you wait, the more expensive it's going to get. So file your return as soon as possible, pay what you can, and explore your options if you can't pay the full amount. The IRS, honestly, is more flexible than most people realize, and there are lots of legitimate paths to resolving even a messy tax situation. So if you're not sure where to start or your situation feels complicated, reach out to a qualified tax professional. I'm happy to help. I do taxes for my clients as well, so feel free to reach out if you want some guidance. And the right guidance can help you save a significant amount of money and also stress. So keep that in mind. All right, thanks everyone for joining me today. Appreciate you being a listener. And if you want to reach out and chat in real time, you can always book a free consultation on my website, which is elevationfinancial.com. Always happy to chat. All right. Thanks everyone for joining me today. Have a great day. We will see you next time.